President Donald Trump says both he and Chinese President Xi Jinping believe there's a solution to the North Korean nuclear crisis. The president held talks with his Chinese counterpart today during his visit to the region. The two leaders also discussed trade. The U.S. has a larger trade deficit with China than any other country. In other news out of China, Montana ranchers will have a new $200 million market next year. A new trade deal signed Wednesday will deliver Montana beef to China. Chinese online retailer JD.com signed the agreement with the Montana Stock Growers Association. The deal calls for the purchase of a minimum of $200 million worth of beef over the next 3 years. The company will also look to invest another $100 million to build a processing plant in Montana next year, but the facility's location has not been determined. Wednesday's announcement came from Montana Senator Steve Daines, who called it a landmark agreement that, quote, has the potential to substantially increase Montana opportunity and agricultural exports to the fastest growing overseas market for beef. This past May, China lifted its U.S. beef ban for the first time since 2003. This new deal is part of a commitment from JD to purchase $2 billion in U.S. products, which announced while President Trump is in China this week. Closer to home, for the first time, a deer in Montana tests positive for chronic wasting disease. The fatal disease affects mule deer, white-tailed deer, elk, and moose, and has been creeping toward Montana for years, but now it's finally here. The deer in question is a mule deer buck that was harvested southeast of Bridger in late October in Hunting District 510, which consists of a mix of private and public land. A second sample from the animal has been sent to a Colorado State University lab to further confirm the finding. Those results are expected next week. With the disease already confirmed in Canada, the Dakotas, and Wyoming, Montana officials knew it was only a matter of time.
For a long time, the states surrounding the north and east and south parts of Montana have had chronic wasting disease, and it's been creeping our way. And so we've known for a long time that it was not a matter of if we ever got chronic wasting disease, it was a matter of when. And we got our first positive sample confirmed late yesterday afternoon.
We've got a situation down there. Montana can do everything right, or do its best to address this situation, but until you figure out a way to clean up that vector and figure out a way to break that transmission line between the feed grounds and Montana wildlife, it's an issue that Montanans are going to have to deal with for a long time.
Gibson says FWP's incident command team is already in the area to do further testing where the infected animal was harvested. The disease is a slow-moving, fatal disease that, if left unmanaged, it can result in long-term population declines. One possible response to the finding is to hold a special CWD hunt that would collect enough samples to determine the prevalence of the disease and to see if it has spread. Gibson says there's no evidence CWD can be transmitted to humans, but it's recommended not to ingest meat from animals that appear to be sick or are known to be CWD positive. Fish, Wildlife and Parks encourages all hunters harvesting deer within hunting districts 502 and 510 to get their animals sampled at the Laurel Check Station or at the regional office in Billings. The Bureau of Land Management and Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke want to hear what Montanans have to say about a 2-year-old plan that's keeping the greater sage-grouse off the endangered species list. The BLM office in Billings held what it calls a scoping meeting on Wednesday to explain the current plan and hear from the public. The BLM can modify policy, but certain changes will require an amendment process. Some say they're concerned changes might affect the sage-grouse population, while other groups are satisfied with the plan as it stands.
We don't want to roll back the entire plans and start from scratch. That's unfair to the Westerners who put so much time into it. An endangered species listing would be harmful for all Montanans, our Western way of life, and so we really need to work to make sure that that is avoided at all costs.
His concerns are that we didn't fully engage the states and our partners in the development of the initial plans. This was, I think, in response to a lot of other states' concerns about plans in their states, but we're not seeing a lot of that concern arise in Montana yet.
The BLM had originally set November 27th as the end of the public comment period, but during the meeting it received word that it would allow more time and will now accept comments until December 1st. Following up on this week's election results, after Lockwood voters said yes, school trustees have 2 years to plan to levy taxes to build a new high school. And to be clear, the vote does not authorize construction of the high school. Voters will decide that in an upcoming election. Tim Sather, the chair of the Lockwood School Board, tells Q2 he's excited the measure was passed with overwhelming support.
This is the most excited I've seen the community about this. I don't know that I've run into anybody that said no. So everybody I've talked to is yes, you got to get it done right now. We want it. And that's across the board, people with kids, people with older kids, and obviously the kids, people with their younger kids that will attend this school if it's built. So it's pretty exciting.
Sather says the next step is to find an architect, and he's hopeful they could have something on the ballot in May. Meanwhile, in Helena, the city's next mayor is garnering attention for his life story and the historic aspect of his win. Wilmot Collins narrowly defeated longtime incumbent Mayor Jim Smith on Tuesday. The margin, less than 350 votes. Collins came to the U.S. as a refugee from Liberia almost 30 years ago. He's lived in the Helena area for 23 years. Historian Ellen Baumler says Collins will be the first black mayor in the state, though Helena residents chose one unofficial black mayor in 1874 before the city was incorporated. Collins says he wasn't thinking about making history when he decided to run.
We decided to talk to the voters and see what they wanted. I had my issues I ran on, and then today it's national and people are talking about the historical. I'm still trying to take all of this in.
Collins is a child protection specialist with the Montana Department of Health and Human Services. He ran on a platform to increase funding for public safety and wants to address area homelessness, specifically among veterans and teens. In other news, when state lawmakers convene in Helena next week for a special session to balance the budget, some legislators are already planning to expand the agenda. Governor Steve Bullock's budget balancing proposal includes about $75 million each in spending cuts, budget transfers, and temporary tax increases. But Senate President Scott Sales of Bozeman told MTM News a majority of Republicans will vote to include other proposals on the agenda. Those additions include lowering the legally required amount of cash that the state must have as a year-end budget cushion, accepting $32 million in an account held by the owner of the private prison in Shelby, and another $30 million from a state employees' health fund. Together, these three proposals alone generate about $160 million toward filling the state's $227 million budget hole.
I think the majority of our caucus will agree that we just need additional ideas out there in order to balance the budget. And so this is going to give us the opportunity to work with Democrats and hopefully with the governor's office to explore more of these ideas in full. Why wouldn't you put that on the table right now while we have everybody here to see if, to flesh those things out and see if they make sense for the state of Montana?
The special session is scheduled to convene on Tuesday. Our last story for you this morning, Thanksgiving came early for some drivers in the Magic City, thanks to the Billings Police Department.
Maybe I'll just make your decision for turkey a little bit easier this year and just hand you one if you wouldn't mind.
Oh, is that right? Well, yeah. That's awfully kind.
Some of those who were pulled over on Wednesday received turkeys and not tickets. Minor traffic violations earned Billings drivers an opportunity to be duped. Turkeys were donated to the police department, so they decided to share the goodwill. Drivers were given a warning and a turkey. Officer Andrew Sanders says he enjoyed interacting with the public in such a positive light.
You don't get to see the amount of traffic stops that we make or the DUIs that we stop from hitting people or the drugs that we take off the street. So to have that tangible thing to be able to look at and see and know that you're making a difference, even if it is just a turkey in someone's life, is kind of nice.